welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at how to design a garden that is deer and rabbit resistant. I saw this garden at a public garden while I was in Minnesota visiting a nursery up there, and I thought this would be perfect to share with others. This garden was beautiful, it had many layers, it had color, but I noticed there wasn't a lot of deer or rabbit damage, and a lot of it had to do with how the garden was laid out and the plants that they chose. So without further ado, let's take a look. We are at the Noeremberg Gardens, which is a public garden located on Lake Winnetonka in Minnesota. This garden sits in a public park and therefore has ready access for deer and rabbits. Here are some of the takeaways that I learned while observing this garden that would work for any home garden. There was a variety of plants that were both rabbit and deer resistant. Things such as this mountain mint, as well as alliums, both the summer blooming alliums as well as the spring blooming alliums. You'll see spent blooms after a while that have not been cut back as of yet. They have irises, they have daylilies, there are coneflowers, and there's even foxgloves and things like that. There's also artemisia, yarrow, and a bunch of different other perennials such as hyssop. What I did notice was that things that were desired by deer were placed in the middle of the beds so that the deer would have to bypass all the things that smell terrible to them, as well as the things that are either bitter or have a different texture in order to get to them. Deers do not like peonies, and this garden had a lot of peonies all around. Here I'm pointing out the spent alliums from spring. There's also monarda, which has a smell, hyssop, which has a smell, as well as a variety of grasses. There's also baptisia, which they don't care for as well. Now the grasses with deer, they tend not to like the texture. It's a texture thing for them, and so they will often leave them alone. There was a lot of Joe-Pye weed also in this garden. And one thing you will notice throughout the garden is all the plantings repeat, so that gives the garden cohesion, which works really well. If you're wanting to create a cohesive garden, you want to repeat the plants. I will include a list of plants that I noticed. So there's some blue stem grass. There's also different types of pennesetum, as well as different types of monarda. The color scheme for this garden this year was white, pinks with pops of pale yellow. And it is repeated throughout the planting. There's flag irises and a whole strand of it. There's also a bunch of trees to create the park-like atmosphere that was desired. My friend and I toured this, and I started to record the video and do the voiceover in person. And then we started talking about our family and private things, so I ended up having to do a voiceover, so excuse me. As you can see here, Joe-Pye weed abounds, and there are a lot of butterflies typically in this garden, but because it was a rainy day when we went to visit, there weren't as many butterflies. You will notice white Joe-Pye weed as well as the pink Joe-Pye weed. They had different grasses here again, repeating of the artemisia that we saw before, as well as lavender, which was new in this section of the garden. I think the other section was cut back. Now, lavender is a repellent to both deer and rabbits. They don't like the smell or the taste of it, so they'll leave it alone. So at least we would get some benefits. Now, off way behind, you will see that's a hydrangea tree. And you can see from the hydrangea tree that it is planted in the middle of the garden, but it is limbed up so the deer can't really get to it to eat it, because deers love hydrangeas and they love to eat the buds and the blooms. So they treat it as more of a tree than a shrub. Here's my friend Meg. We were both admiring the Joe-Pye weed and planning to add tons of it to our garden. I've already started purchasing Joe-Pye Weed to add into the gardens because it adds so much color in the late season garden. It is a pollinator magnet and it stands out nice and tall. So here you see a strand of 3 hydrangea trees straight ahead. There's also another one on the right. That's a panicle hydrangea. As you can see, they are dead center in these beds. There's also penstemon, mountain mint, nepeta, and a host of other plants. I am definitely going to be adding some of these plants to my garden because I'm starting to have some rabbit pressure in the garden, which I've never had to deal with before. I've also not had a lot of deer, but I'm planning for it. Do you see how they would have to scale the wall to get up to the hydrangeas, but they've limbed them up, which means that it limits how much damage that can be done by the deer. I loved seeing all these panicle hydrangeas. There are some more there. The coneflowers, you see they're all intact. Now this one had yellow asters disease. Unfortunately, the only cure for yellow asters is to remove that coneflower and bag it and throw it away. But as I walked around the garden, I noticed there wasn't any more with that problem. So whatever it is, it's fixed. In this bed, I saw some amsonia as well as a different type of monarda. There's some more white Joe-Pye weed and another blue hyssop. This acre that the park sits on is part of a 72-acre donation that was made from the family that owned this land. This arbor that's here, pergola, is part of the original gardens that they had here. I was admiring how they trellised this clematis. They basically had a cage around it and allow it to run up the cage. So the deer could not get to the clematis through the cage, and thought it was a pretty neat idea. Let me see if it's pretty, right? There's the cage attached to the post for the pergola. They also had loads and loads and loads of peonies planted along this pergola here on the right side. So as I toured this garden, I made a lot of mental notes as to what I wanted to change in my garden so that, number one, there's always color, there's always texture, so that I don't have to be stressed out when I see rabbits and their babies hopping through my yard, which this year I've had 2 sets of rabbits in my yard throughout the year, and they're wreaking havoc, y'all. So if I planted some of these things and did a few of these things, I think I would have less visits from the rabbits, but also better, less stress overall for me trying to accommodate these rabbits in my yard. I don't want to not have wildlife, but I don't want them to destroy what I've worked so hard for. I also don't mind them being on my property, just not in my gardens. I provide a lot of food sources for them in the wilder parts of our yard. Stay out of the cultivated areas. That's all I want, right? I think that's all gardeners want. Isn't this mint and this allium combination so pretty? That pink and that white. There's some foxgloves there again. And it's just lovely how it all repeats, but it doesn't look tired, you know, because sometimes when things are repeated, it looks dated and it looks tired. So it's nice to see this garden where that's not the case. I thoroughly enjoyed touring it and the inspiration that it provided. I thank my friend Meg for showing it to me because I came away raring to go with some ideas. There's some verbena that also they don't like. So much, much, much appreciation for this park, the design of it, the repetition of the plants, and just the many options that it gave me to add to my gardens and to have that mid-season color that my garden currently is lacking. Thank you so much for joining me today as I toured this garden. I hope that you find something beneficial for your garden and that these images that I've captured help you to lay your garden out in such a way to decrease your stress level and to increase your enjoyment, but also keep the rabbits and the deer out of your garden. Thank you so much for joining me today as we toured this beautiful garden in Minnesota. If you have enjoyed this content or any content on my channel, please consider subscribing. As always, thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and thank you for your support. Happy gardening.